right? Yesterday we have completed slow movements and sudden movements of the what to call slow movements and sudden movements. So now today we'll see the Pacific Ring of Fire. Dear students, it is many decades ago onwards, geologists they have identified number of earthquakes and volcanic activities taking place around the Pacific rim. That means at the edge of the Pacific Ocean. So they identified many of the earthquakes. Many of the earthquakes. They identified that many of the earthquakes are taking place around the edge of the Pacific Ocean, near about 3 by 4th, 3 and a fourth of all active volcanoes are lying in the Pacific edge boundary. And it is the theory already we studied that the movement of the plates is called plate tectonic movement, right? So the plate tectonic movement given an idea for understanding volcanic eruptions and earthquakes near around the Pacific boundary. There, the plate boundaries are found all the way around the basin, Pacific basin. Look at my dear students. This is the what you call figure map showing that Pacific ring of the red line. This is a red line shows the entire Pacific plate upon which Pacific Ocean is lying, right? So this major Pacific plate upon which Pacific Ocean is there touches with the South American plate. I have given a dot there, see. Then North American plate, right? And what you call this Eurasian, what you call Europe and Asia, consistently called Eurasian plate and Indo-Australian plate. So there is a what you call a collision of a Pacific plate with all other major plates. So that is the reason we find many of the earthquakes and what you call volcanic eruptions are nearby the Pacific boundaries instant. So it is that many volcanoes and earthquakes are taking place. So it is called by geologists that Pacific Ring of Fire. What they call it is Pacific Ring of Fire. So you may get a question in examination giving this map, and you will be asked that observe the given map and write about it. Then you should write what I have given the explanation, right? Next, we will see that external processes, right? There are two types of processes: internal processes, external processes. In the last class, we have seen internal processes. What in by internal process? Some kind of activities taking place inside the earth, in the mantle. We have seen slow movement and sudden movement. Slow movement and sudden movement of the plates have created some landforms, right? Some relief features are created. For example, volcan igneous rocks are created, and some kinds of rocks are created under the layers of the earth. Those are what you call below the crust, so that we called them what you call intrusive landform. This occurred by the what you call internal process. By internal process, we have seen lava plateaus also form, right? Lava erupting from various fisheries, various fissures, okay, which are on the earth's surface, led to the formation of lava plateaus, right? The next today we'll see that external processes. That means some kind of activities taking place on earth surface. It is not internal of the earth surface. It is above the earth surface. What are those? Those are water and air. Okay, water, flowing water and blowing air. They work rigorously. Understand? Rigorously to wear away. That means to remove the surface and what to call interaction of these to constructive and destructive forces gives rise to the great diversity of present day landforms. The external processes on one land wear away the surface of the rocks and mountains. This what you call here the wind. When wind blows and water flows, we see that they cut the top surface of the rocks and mountains, and they transport that worn out particles and deposit them at lowlands and the basins. So this process of wearing away the top layer of the earth surface and depositions causes to the general leveling of the surface. My dear students, we see that mountains are there, plateaus are there, and plains are there, right? Plains are little lower height. Plateaus are somewhat greater to the plains, right? Mountains also what we find at a greater height, right? So the surface of the land is undulating. It is not a level one, right? So when the wind blows, what will happen? The land which is somewhat high, that will be eroded by what you call blowing wind. Erode in the sense what? It will be cut off continuously. There will be cut off the top layer of the what you call earth surface, and such will be carried by the either flowing water or blowing wind and deposited where there is low land. In that way, the low land becomes equal to the what to call another besides or adjusting land which is above it. So it leads to leveling of the surface. Instead, by the external process occurs by the blowing wind and flowing water. So water and wind are the agents of the earth's surface instead, and these agents water and wind will bring what you call changes on the surface of the earth that leads to general leveling of the surface. In that way, the mountains and plateaus and also plains which are already in a particular shape, shape their size will change by the blowing wind and what you call flowing water. So when wind and water works on these existing landforms and brings a change, whatever the landforms, whatever the landforms comes to form after the wind and water action, those lands are called third order of landforms. Here, clear. I have selected the text, my dear students. Look at this. Third order of landforms. Understand? So, in this way, we have seen three types of landforms, right? Primary landforms or first order of landforms, which are formed at the time of Earth evolution, that is oceans and continents, right? And second order of landforms, which are mountains, valleys, plateaus, plains, which originated due to the internal process, that is slow movement and sudden movement of the plates, right? That led to the formation of Himalayan mountains, folded mountains. Throughout the world, we find folded mountains. And when folded mountains originated at the foot of the folded mountains, we also see some large basins. Valleys are formed, right? So those are second order of landforms formed by the internal process. And third order of the landforms formed by the external process with water and wind. So the flowing water and blowing wind will carve, will change the existing mountains, valleys, deltas, sand dunes with a process that is denudation process. What process, my dear students? Denudation process. So the denudation process consists of several stages, my dear students. Okay, what are those? Weathering, erosion, hmm? Weathering, erosion, then just a minute. It is yeah, transportation, deposition. These are the four stages we find in denudation process. Okay, uh, what to call it is a geomorphic cycle. We call it a geomorphic cycle also because the existing landforms, uh, that is second order of landforms, are going to change and turns to new form of a third order of landforms by the process that is denudation process, in which several stages are there. Those are weathering, erosion, transportation, deposition. These are the reason responsible for a new order of landforms. Understand? Are you clear, my dear students? Let us see that how what is meant by denudation process and how it works out, and what is weathering, erosion, transportation, and deposition, right? So when all these stages work out on existing landforms, that is to be called a denudation process. Here it is there. I'll take into the text. Okay. See, it is known as denudation process. What is known as denudation process? That is weathering, erosion, transportation, and deposition. Four stages. These four stages work out simultaneously, always, on all the landforms throughout the world, throughout the earth. Understand? So that process continues. It is a continuous process. Which one? Denudation process is a continuous process. Understand? So here we see that the low lands, whatever we see today, were once mountains and plateaus. Okay, one example I want to share with you, my dear students. Have you identified that on the western part of India there is what you call Aravali mountains, right? Aravali mountains are the oldest folded mountains. Himalayan mountains are the youngest folded mountains. What do you mean by youngest? Which formed recently, some 220 million years ago. Right? It is surprising, no? Just 220 million years ago, Himalayan mountains have formed. Those are new folded mountains. We call them youngest folded mountains. Then when these are youngest, definitely there would be oldest. Then what are oldest folded mountains? Those are what that Aravali mountains, which are at what to call Rajasthan, understand, the western part of India. Okay, their Thar desert is there, right? So once Aravali mountains were very great height, understand, but their height has been changed by the denudation process, understand. So what I want to say today, what you call the mountains and plateaus, whatever we see that once upon a time those were different in the shape and size, and they transformed by the wind and water. So the structure of mountains, plateaus, and plains keep on changing throughout what to call its life cycle, that is called erosion cycle or geomorphic cycle. Understand? You may get a question for 1 mark. What is geomorphic cycle? Okay, then you should write that the existing landforms keep on changing through a process is called geomorphic cycle or erosion cycle. Understand? And this is done by a process called denudation process. Okay, and this denudation process is continuous process. This denudation process consists of four stages. One is weathering, second is erosion, third is transportation, and fourth is deposition, right? So these four stages will go on every moment at a time. Don't think that first weathering, then after what you call erosion. When weathering takes place, at the same time only we see the remaining three, that is erosion, transportation, deposition. All these four stages work out at a time, my dear students. Understand? So it is a continuous process. Instead, let us see that how air and water transform the surface of the earth. Before going to this, I want to share a little example with you people. Instead, what is that? My dear students, it is have you seen that when you pour some water on earth's surface, suppose a bucket water is there. You want to wash that bucket water. Some water is there in the bucket. You want to wash it. Then what you will do? After washing that, you will pour on the floor. When you pour on the floor, what will you see? Some mud of the earth's surface is weathered, eroded, and transported, deposited somewhere, right? So all these processes, four stages, four processes occurred at the same time, right? Same thing takes place when water and wind works on existing landforms. Understand? So let us see that, just keeping this example in the mind so that you can understand easily. Okay. So rocks were formed out of the molten material that we have seen, which came up from the mantle of the earth, right? So these rocks, right, by the internal process we have seen certain rocks, which formed on the earth's surface. When lava erupted out, it turned to cool, then their solid form of rocks formed on the earth's surface, right? Now these rocks, which we call extrusive landforms. Why do we call extrusive landforms? Which are on the earth surface, right? So these extrusive landforms, like rocks which were originated once upon a time from the mantle, exposed continuously over millions of years to the sunlight, to the water, flowing water, to the rains, uh, and to the blowing wind. Understand? So these rocks, when they exposed over millions of years, they have been shaped into valleys and plains of loose soil, river valleys cut into mountains and plateaus. So how does it happen? Right? A little example, funny example I want to share you. Okay. Have you seen that when you move on bike, huh? When you move on bike with your parents, what do you see? Air blowing through wind, the wind blowing through your hair, right? Then you see that your hair is pulling back. Understand? Those who go for many kilometers daily on the bike, have you seen their head? Their head becomes bald head. They lose some hair on the head. How it happened? It happened with the blowing wind. The blowing wind works out on the head. It withers out. It it erodes out. It erodes out and transports out and deposits somewhere, so that the head becomes ball head. Understand? So this is an example, funny example. Same thing happens here too also, my dear students. Okay. So how it is that actually the hard primary rocks are broken into small pieces. When a rock is exposed to the sunlight, What do we see? Due to the sunlight, it becomes a heated surface will expand, right? So that the rock tries to expand by the sunlight. Okay, and in winter, the temperatures will be very less, so that the top layer of the rock tries to contract it. So contraction, expansion. Okay, contraction and expansions year after year, like this million years, makes that the top surface of the rock break into small pieces, right? All these smaller pieces are cut off from the primary rock, what we call parent rock, and these small pieces carried to the lower areas, understand, carried to lower down to other places and deposited there, understand. So what happens in this process? So from the beginning of breaking of the rock into small pieces to the last stage where it is deposited, till that time we see that several what to call processes involved in that is weathering, erosion, transportation, deposition, right? Let us see that what is weathering. Okay, dear students, it is different weathering and erosion. Understand? Huh? Why spelling also you see that weathering, Weathering, not WHE. Okay, that becomes what you call the status of atmosphere. Weather is a status of atmosphere. Weathering means it is a process, understand. What process? We see that gradual breaking of a rock into small pieces by the atmospheric forces or weather forces, right? That is, what do we see? That the surface of the rock, it may be the rock, or it may be the plateau, or what you call the plains, understand. In all these places, what do we see? There, the rocks, when exposed to the heat, they expand and contract, understand. When they cool down, it contracts. When they become heat, they expands, understand. So this happens every day, every night, year after year, in all the seasons. It is in summer and winter, right? So the surface rock contracts and expands and again contracts. So it gradually becomes brittle, then begins to break down, right? Where what do you see? When you go on what to call expanding and contracting a rubber, what do you see? After several times, if you after doing several times, you will see that it breaks, right? Similarly, here the rocks which are exposed to the heat and also exposed to the water coldness during the winter season, there will be what to call a gradual disintegration. Okay, they break into small pieces. Instant, it turns to small pieces. Further, we see that in that area where it small cracks, small brittles occurred, there the water moisture works in that process to expand it. Okay, water reacts with the chemicals of the rocks. Rock consists of different chemicals. So when water joins with that chemicals of the rock, further the rock becomes weaker. This process, what do we call that? Weathering. My dear students, what is weathering? The process of the process by which the process by which rocks are weakened and broken is called weathering. It is different with what you call erosion. Don't get confusion. Okay, when the definition is asked about weathering, you should write this only. Okay, it is not the definition of erosion. There will be slight variation in the definition of weathering and what to call erosion. So what is weathering? It is a process in which rocks are weakened and broken. It's called weathering, right? So look at a large cracked rock and you will find that the color of the internal core of the rock is different from the outer layer, right? I'll show that rock here. It is there. Wait, just a minute. Look at here, my dear students. This is a figure. Grand Canyon of Colorado, right? What do you see, my dear students, here? The bottom layer, the bottom of the rock color is different with the top one, right? Why it is different? Because it is exposed to the sunlight, air, and water, right? So we see that the internal core of the rock is different from outer layer because the color of the outer layer changes due to the process of weathering. Simple, right? When you wear a wristwatch, what do you see at that area? It becomes a what you call there will be a change on the skin color, right? It means that remaining part of the skin is exposed to the sunlight. Where we keep watch, there won't be what you call exposed to the sunlight, so that skin will be what you call somewhat white in color, right? So when the similar in the same process, we see that the rocks which are continuously exposed to the sunlight and wind and water, its color changes. Understand, right? So this rock color is different from what you call internal core to the outer layer, right? The outer layer is different in color by the process of weathering. Understand? So you will find that it is easier to chip small pieces of rock from the outer layer rather than from the core of the rock. So what do you see on the top layer of the rock, right? Where it is exposed, there you will see that some small particles or some small pieces of the rock we will find, but internal core we cannot find that one, right? So what is the weathering? The process of rocks becoming weak and breaking, right? The rocks becoming weak and breaking into small pieces is called a weathering. Next, we'll see erosion, right? The flowing water and wind, these two have a great power to slowly cut away, wear away the rocks and the soil cover in higher places, right? See, for example, on the mountain, on the from the mountains, from the top of the mountains, if the water is flowing, what do you see? The flowing water on the slope of the mountain will work out and it goes on cutting the surface of the mountain, right? So when water flows from the top of the mountain, it can carry the big rocks also. Understand? So flowing water and wind have a great power, great energy to cut or wear away the rocks and soils in higher places, not at the bottom, right? When it becomes when it reaches to the low lying areas, the speed of the water and the wind reduces. Where the water speed and wind velocity is high, there only we can see that cutting of the rocks soil is high. Understand? So wind too, water acts in many ways. We'll study in the next how it works out, in how many ways it will go on working, right? Water in the sense rain, river, flowing groundwater, sea waves, glaciers, these all are the water examples for water. Water is an agent, okay? Wind also one agent, understand? So water acts, water in the form of rain, river, flowing groundwater, sea waves, and glaciers. In all these forms, understand, I am selecting the text, my dear students. Look at this. In the form of rain, river, flowing groundwater, sea waves, glaciers. In all these forms, water works on the surface. right? So when water in the form of rain works, some kind of landforms are formed that is different with the landforms formed by the river, and also these two landforms different with the what to call landforms formed by the sea waves and glaciers. Now, this we'll see in the next class. Understand? And similarly, how water acts in many ways, like rain, river, flowing groundwater, and sea waves and glaciers. Wind too also works in different forms, right? That is a storm. Look at here, storm. Selecting the text, my dear students. Storms, gust, with steady winds. These also forms of the winds, different forms of the winds. So in these many forms, winds also work out on the earth's surface to bring change on the earth surface instant. So the water and wind will wear away or cut away the earth surface. Understand? So that as water and wind works on earth's surface, we call these moving agents. They are moving, so these are called moving agents. Understand? So here you need to keep in mind that erosion is different with weathering. Understand? What is erosion? Huh? You should write that it is the active wearing away. See, my dear students, I'm selecting the text. The active wearing away the earth's surface by the moving agents like water and wind is called erosion. What is weathering? The process of rocks in which the process in which rocks and the earth's surface becoming weak and what to call getting into the cracks instant. The process in which rocks becoming weak and breaking is called weathering instant, right? Please write these definitions in your classwork. Okay, what is weathering, what is erosion, and what is denudation process instant. So what is erosion? Active wearing away. Wearing means to cut. Okay, to cut the earth surface instant. How it is cut out? It is cut out by moving agents. What are the moving agents? That is air and wind. So the moving agents, air and wind, wears away the earth's surface. That is called erosion. It is active. Weathering is very slowly, my dear students, whereas erosion is very active. It goes on very fast. Understand? So there is slight variation is there between erosion and weathering. Okay, I think you it is clear to you what is weathering and erosion. Okay, uh, the next is that transportation. With this we'll conclude here only because 5 minutes is there, my dear students. Okay, so it is what is transportation, right? The eroded particles, right? By weathering and erosion, the rock broke into small pieces or the earth's surface also cut out. When it cut out, it becomes their small particles. So all the eroded materials, small particles, small rocks, gravel, and soft mud, fine soil, which are what to call formed by the weathering and erosion, are carried by blowing wind and water from one place to other place. That is called transportation, right? So what is transportation? I'm selecting the text, my dear students. Look at this. The eroded materials, understand, in the form of small rocks, gravel, mud, fine soil, etc., carried by blowing wind and flowing water is called transportation, right? Look at this selected one, right? Eroded material means material which is cut out by the process of erosion and weathering, right? What are those eroded materials? Small rocks and gravels means some round shaped stones, some mud which is somewhat what you call different in shape comparing to the what you call fine soil also will be there on the earth crust, understand? So all these are the what different forms carried by wind and water is called transportation. Rivers and winds and even waves in the sense of what sea waves cut the soil and what to call rocks and from one place and take them to distant places. Sometimes they may take to hundreds of kilometers, my dear students. Have you observed that in the TVs and movies that in the wind, when the wind blows in the desert part, along with the wind, when the storms takes place in the desert part, what we have see, sand particles also carried by the blowing wind, and that sand is deposited somewhere. It may be sometimes hundreds of kilometers, understand? Whether it is hundreds of kilometers or some 20 kilometers depends on the wind velocity, understand? So there is the eroded materials are carried by blowing wind and water from one place to another place is called transportation, right? This is called transportation. 2 minutes is left. After that the class come to end. Shall I continue? One only left. Deposition, right? So nothing but what is deposition? When these are deposited at one place, okay, the reverse wind, when they become slow, when it's a movement, when it becomes slow, then they may not carry the water particles which are carried by them, right? So where what you call the water flowing from the mountain, it carries. When it comes to plains are flat places, right? So in the plains the water speed reduces, and similarly the wind velocity also somewhere will reduce. So where the wind velocity and water speed reduces, then these two cannot carry the water, the particles which they brought from other place, then slowly they go on depositing, okay? These will go on dumping dirt base, helps the forming the river basins. We'll see in the next class again this deposition, okay? You go on writing about denudation process and what is precipitating of fire, what is geomorphic circle, and what is weathering and erosion, what is difference between weathering and erosion, what is transportation. These you should write. This is a what class today, okay? After completing this second chapter, we will go for a what you call we'll go for what keeping a doubt class instead. Till then we will stop the class, okay? Thank you, my dear students, okay? Good day, right?